Thank you. Thank you. Rick, thanks for inviting me. Andrew, thank you for that introduction. My brother Josh was obviously speaking with you. Before I get started, congratulations to all those award winners, but I happen to know Ocean Spray really well and Randy, Randy's probably not here today, but watching that video and thinking about that type of innovation, and innovation is something that I'm going to talk about today. It's pretty special, and that's a pretty special company that we have down here in our Commonwealth, a little bit south of here, so congratulations to all the winners. Watching that video and having sat in the draft room last night, and we got the draft tonight and tomorrow, gets you pretty excited about football. It's right around the corner. This is sort of the official start of the season in our minds, and I'll talk a little bit about the NFL and innovation in the NFL in the back half of my comments. But I wanted to start by talking about manufacturing, given that this is AIM and this is a group that's about manufacturing. And I think many people don't know that the Kraft Group actually has a significant number of assets in the manufacturing sector. And here in Massachusetts and New England, we actually have about 1,000 employees in manufacturing, and I mean basic commodity manufacturing. We're in the corrugated box business and the linerboard business, making brown paper that makes corrugated boxes. So I spend about 40% of my time in basic manufacturing environments, commodity product, capital intensive, all the stuff that a lot of you probably face every day. And I can tell you something, when I was invited to speak here and they wanted me to talk only about football, I said I really wanted to talk manufacturing for a little bit of the time, because I can tell you that from my family's perspective, we have never been more excited about the prospects and the future of manufacturing here in this region than we are today. And the reason for that is we really believe, and you saw it with the award winners, that Massachusetts is because of the intellectual capital that resides here, is really the epicenter of the innovation economy, not just in this country, but for the world. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a little more detail in a minute, but I think it's probably good to give a little bit of historical perspective, about how we have viewed manufacturing. And if you turn the clock back just a dozen, or let's say 15 years to 1999, we didn't feel the way we feel today. We talked very seriously about divesting of our manufacturing businesses, and that's because up here in Massachusetts and New England, labor costs back then were really high. We're always going to be uncompetitive relative to other industries that are in other parts of this country on labor cost. Energy is high. That's not going to change anytime soon. We had an administration throughout the 90s who was allegedly, Republican and business friendly, and I'm an independent, but I'll tell you, I think the administrations we had in this state in the 90s heaped regulation and burdens on business and was not business friendly. And finally, NAFTA was passed around that time, and you saw lots of people that were your customers fleeing across the border to Mexico, much like the exodus to Asia, which had started as well. So we sat there and looked 15 years ago, and we talked about it a lot. But I guess inertia caused us not to divest. And today, I'm really happy we didn't divest. And I think there have been three big macro changes over the last 15 years, macroeconomic changes over the last 15 years, that have really swung the pendulum back to the favor of Massachusetts in terms of being competitive from a manufacturing standpoint. And those three things are the following. The first is the amazing changes in communications that have happened. 15 years ago, the world was still very much a hardline world. People used hardline phones dramatically more than they used wireless phones. And the wireless phones that existed weren't smartphones. They were the clunky, old cell phones. Maybe a third of the people had internet connections at work, but they were on desktops, and all the internet connection was used for was effectively surfing the web to kill time when you were bored at work. It had no business purpose or business application. Certainly the whole concept of apps and everything didn't exist. And as you think about the world today and the power of this type of computing, or with an iPad or any type of tablet in your hand, and the whole idea of applications that sit in the cloud, and the power that that can put in the hands of businesses to deal with their customers, or entrepreneurs to go out and access free storage, free computing, answers to problems that you couldn't have thought about before. It's just incredibly powerful. The second big change that has happened over those 15 years, and it's related to the one I just said, is the change in computing power and information technology and storage. I know I was sitting with somebody from EMC, and EMC is just one of these great companies, and the evolution that they have helped bring on in the world in terms of helping to decrease the cost of storage, decrease the cost exponentially, while increasing exponentially the amount of storage you can get on a single device. And you couple that with computing power, and all of a sudden you're able to solve problems in the world like sequencing the human genome, or all of the other big data problems that exist that nobody would have ever thought about dealing with because no one had 5 years and $100 million. Today, those problems that would have taken years and years to solve, and literally tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, can be solved in hours, if not minutes. And what that does for people with big ideas, but not a lot of capital, is just gigantic. Finally, the third big change is the global logistics infrastructure. We heard about a lot of international advances of the companies in the videos, but I can tell you at the Kraft Group, we did business last year in 96 countries in the world. And we've been doing business internationally since the early 70s. In the last 15 years, the ability to actually move any type of product, be it a small, high value add, processor, or big bulky commodities from any part of the world, the Ukraine to Vietnam, from Saudi Arabia to someplace in Azerbaijan. You couldn't have done that 15 years ago. Today, you can get products expediently and securely from any point of the world to any other point in the world. And so I think those three big changes together have really said to people who want to innovate that anything is possible. You don't need capital, you just need a good idea. And if you just need a good idea, it goes by definition that the economies are going to develop in places that have the most intellectual capital. And Massachusetts has more intellectual capital per capita by far than any other place in the world. And that's because of these bedrock institutions that we have in education and healthcare. You look at places like Harvard and MIT, they're the two greatest universities in the world. I don't care what anyone else says, it's not even close. I know the people at Stanford would debate that, but there's a handful of Stanford people who do. Everybody at MIT and Harvard is exceptional. And then you've got all these amazing other schools around it, whether it's BC, BU, Worcester Polytech, that turns out unbelievable people, great liberal arts schools, Williams, Amherst. And then you look at our healthcare institutions, Mass General, Brigham and Women's. We are the only city in America that has 2 top 10 hospitals, according to US News and World's ranking, but in our city. Children's Hospital Boston, the #1 children's hospital in the country, and Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, one of the leading cancer research centers in the country. They're all within a few miles of each other, okay? And the intellectual capital that sits at all of these places is enormous. And unlike 15 years ago, that intellectual capital, the people with all the brilliant ideas, they don't just publish papers and let them sit on shelves and go back and think about something else and publish a paper. They can now act on these activities. And so you have doctors and researchers and students starting businesses right here in Massachusetts and building an innovation economy. The one thing you need to layer over all of that, though, to make it really come to life is a government that gets it. And I really believe that this administration, and I'm agnostic politically, but I believe this administration gets it. In 2008, they passed the Life Sciences Initiative. Governor Patrick pushed that through. And $1 billion committed to the life sciences. And what that did is that further helped these great researchers and doctors be willing to take the risk and come out of their labs with their ideas for businesses. And today in Massachusetts, we have 80,000 jobs in the life sciences, and it's growing at a much bigger clip than the economy. 80,000 jobs. A decade ago, it was less than 5,000, okay? And for all of us in this room, even if we're not in the life sciences, if we're not in it, and this is just one example of it, our businesses, we benefit. When there's economic activity, there are multiplier effects. The whole economy gets lifted. And so that intellectual capital, and just one example of it, has really benefited us dramatically as we sit here today. And I have a lot of other examples, and I want to be efficient with my time. But I think for those that don't believe it, let me just say this. If you turn the clock back to 15 years ago when our family was really debating whether or not we should stay in manufacturing, if you don't really believe that we're the hub of innovation now and that there's a benefit to everybody in this room, I would just say the only real difference between us and those Rust Belt communities that haven't come back, those areas in Pennsylvania and Ohio, Detroit, the only difference is we have all that intellectual capital that is sitting at those schools and universities, and that's what's driving our economy today. And that's a huge advantage, so you should be excited about it. And the last statistic that I'll cite in this area, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I think we should each innovate in our businesses and talk about the NFL. The last statistic I'll cite is this. Our governor gets the whole international aspect. He's been on a dozen trade missions in his 7 years in office. But we've built up a great connection with Israel. Israeli-based businesses, okay, businesses that were founded and started in Israel. Today, there are over 200 of them that have their U.S. beachhead in Massachusetts. This year, they will account for over $7 billion of revenue in our Commonwealth's GDP. They'll account for over 12,000 jobs. But the most, I think, interesting statistic is over a third of those businesses have a founder or CEO who actually went to school, went to college or graduate school in Massachusetts. They know how great it is. There's a pull. It draws everybody back. And all of us should be really cognizant of that. Now, I can tell you that we can all benefit from this innovation economy, but you can't just sit back and let it come to you. You have to think about your own businesses proactively. And I was watching that video, Black & Tin making badges and shields. You know, you think, how are you going to change a badge and a shield? Well, I think that security shield idea is brilliant. And I can tell you, in our packaging businesses, we're always trying to think, because it's hard to really innovate on the corrugated box, but it's really boring. I mean, it's really boring. But you can think about sexy spaces around it and how to make it better. And the corrugated box business is so boring that most of our customers, we're the last thing they think about. They think about their core product. They're not thinking about what they're shipping it in. So inevitably, you're getting calls at the last minute. They need your boxes. No one's thought about redesigns, all this other stuff. And usually low-level people in our customers are the ones dealing with it. And those people have a lot of things on their plate. So about 7, 8 years ago, we started working on web-based applications. Today, they sit in the cloud. Anybody that's a customer of our packaging business can literally manage their entire relationship with us from their cell phone. Can literally just go into the app, punch, that's secure, obviously, but you can see wherever we have trucks on the road coming to deliver to you real time where those trucks are. You can call up CAD drawings, you can order, you can look at your history. We wanted to make it simple for people. And by the way, guys, we built it ourselves. It wasn't that hard. Literally a couple $100,000 is a real investment, but if you already have business systems, and some businesses will be less complex, some will be more, you can go out and do things like that and make it easy for your customers to do business with you. The other thing we thought about, even though you can't make a corrugated box sexy, we know that sustainability is sexy. So because we have paper mills and because we know a lot of our customers are interested in innovating in the sustainability area, we started going to them. EMC is one of them. We take all of EMC's waste from their distribution facilities, we bring it to our paper mills. We take their waste brown paper and we put it into paper that we make fresh, and then we make their own boxes out of their own waste, and we put a stamp on the bottom of the box telling their customers that. It doesn't cost anymore. It's just rethinking the product and how to satisfy the customer's needs when you're doing it. Everybody has opportunities like that in their business, and you should, even if you're not in the life sciences or IT, you should think about how you can innovate like Black & Tin. And Ocean Spray invented the Crazen, and you can do all the things like that. So you can innovate in unsexy businesses, but you can innovate, and you need to innovate in sexy businesses too. So at the NFL level, I want to be cognizant of time here. At the NFL level, we don't take anything for granted. And even though, are there any antitrust lawyers in the audience? Well, there is no other football. I was going to say we don't have competition, but we only don't have competition just because there isn't any other football league in the country. And you would think that usually people that don't have a lot of competition, the competition in football takes place on the field between the teams. You get lazy. I can tell you that Commissioner Goodell has signs up all over the NFL telling people to rethink the product every day and think about how we can make it better for the fans of the game, for our season ticket holders, for our players, for anybody that touches the game, how you can make it better. So each year in the off season, a game that most people think is pretty good, last night the NFL draft nationally outrated NBA and NHL playoff games almost 5-1. The NFL draft here in Boston, where the Bruins play, and I'm a huge Bruins fan, and I have to be honest, I would have been watching the Bruins game if I was just agnostic, but the Bruins in an overtime win against our hated rivals in a pretty important playoff game, that only did double what the draft rating did here in Boston. So the NFL is a really powerful business, but we're not going to rest on our laurels. So one example of that is each year, the commissioner has a bunch of different committees. One's called the Competition Committee. Fortunately, I'm not on it because I couldn't do what these guys do, but they literally go to a hotel and spend almost a month there. And it's coaches and owners and executives, a group of people. And they look at every statistic related to our game on the field. Literally every statistic you can possibly imagine. The obvious ones like scoring, but then what type of plays people get injured on, meaning 1st and 10s, 3rd and 7s, what quarter of the game that happens in. We look at margin of victory. We look at it over time. We look at how many passing plays, 0 to 5 yards, 5 to... They look at the game every way you can imagine to try to think about where we might have problems and make it better. And we're tweaking the game each year. So one of the things that committee came up with this year, and this is more of a competitive balance issue, but as technology has continued to get better and better, and our fans are watching these games at home and getting so many angles of replay right away, it's becoming apparent that instant replay, as we've done it for so long, is probably starting to get a little antiquated. And the complexity of our rules and trying to keep the competition fair is just too much to ask a referee to do who's on the field watching it all go on real time, and then having to calm down, go over, put his head in a booth and try to listen to a guy upstairs while people are screaming at him. And so And even when that happens, you've got one ref adjudicating something one way, another doing it another way because it's their interpretation of the rules. So technology has really advanced to the point where we think it's possible to probably do this centrally. We're in New York in a clean, sterile environment with technology and feeds coming in from everywhere. A team of our head referee and 2 other people can pretty much monitor all 3 games. And when there's a reviewable situation, they can get buzzed over, look at it, be calm, no yelling and screaming, and adjudicate on it. And now you've got a consistency across every game being played in the league, which will raise the level of competition and make it fairer from an objective standpoint. Now, we don't usually make big changes like that overnight. You want to experiment with it. So we will experiment with that in preseason this year. The data will be dissected. But I would bet you would see that in the next year probably become a rule in the National Football League. A second example of how that committee works is they realized that there were a disproportionate amount of serious injuries and concussions coming from plays where running backs outside the tackle box, meaning outside the left and the right tackle, would run into space and would put their head down and hit a defender with the crown of their helmet. And so a year ago, we outlawed that because we thought it would make the game safer for the players, would not affect the competition level of the game. And go back and Google it. All these great running backs from throughout history made big vocal complaints about how it was going to ruin the game and make it impossible for running backs. And we made it a 15-yard penalty, and penalties were going to be called. I don't remember anybody talking about it during the season last year. The penalty was never called, the running backs adopted, and our level of serious injuries on plays outside the tackle box dropped dramatically, making the game better for everybody. And as that type of rule seeps down into youth football, high school and youth football, it's only going to make the game better for everybody. Now, at the club level, we're always looking to innovate too, and this will be the last little innovation I talk about. People are talking about how you're going to get people to keep coming to the stadium. You know, it's too nice at home, big screen TV, bathroom right there, freaking, you know, the stuff you've heard from everybody. And I get it, and it makes a lot of sense. But there's something about experiencing any type of sporting event communally, and especially football, which is a whole day event. You go, you tailgate, you do everything. But it's incumbent upon those of us that own teams and own stadiums to make sure we're keeping it a compelling experience. We have to innovate too. So we saw this day coming a while ago. When we were at Gillette, we put full stadium Wi-Fi in 5 years ago. We were the first open-air venue, sporting venue in this country to do it. And then we started developing different applications around it. And interestingly enough, the smartphone adoption even 4 and 5 years ago wasn't there like it is today. But this past season, we really saw the lift in it. And if you come to a Patriots game, if you download our Game Day Live app, you can sit in your seat and do things you can't do at home. You can go back to any play in the game. We chronicle every play in the game for you. So if you're at halftime and you're like, remember that hit that, you know, Mayo put on whoever? You can go back. It's written out in text form and by drive. And you go back, you touch it. You get 4 different angles to rewatch that play as many times as you want to watch it. If you decide you want to go to the bathroom and you want to make sure you use the least amount of time possible to do it, you type in the section that you're sitting in, and we show you the 6 closest bathrooms, and we give you the wait times. So you can make it, you know, I'm going to take the credit for that one. Our people laughed at me when I said we had to figure that out 3 years ago, and now people love it. And the last thing we do is, you can't do in-seat ordering. It doesn't work for 70,000. But what we can do is we can take the wait time out of standing at a concession stand to get through a line to order to get your food. We've done this in a couple of sections in the stadium. We will unleash it to the whole stadium either this season or next. But what we're going to let you do is order from your phone, pay with a credit card, and when your food is ready, It'll just send you a text message or an email, whichever you want, and you'll tell you which stand to go to. It'll be the one closest to where you're sitting. You'll go up, you'll just show your phone, you'll be handed your food, making it more efficient, easier, better to do. So those are the types of things that we're thinking about in innovating in those businesses. And I think bringing it back to the collective, if you're in business in Massachusetts, you should be incredibly excited today. We are so lucky that we live in this state. The opportunities, because of the intellectual capital, because of the fact we have a very good, relatively speaking, education system, we are in a much better position than any of our competitors. But just look inward at your business all the time and try to innovate where and when you can. Thank you very much. And I think if anybody has any questions, is that right, Rick? We'll do a couple minutes of questions. Couple questions if anyone has them. It's hard for me to see somebody you can yell. Anybody have that? Good. Yes, sir.
I was just recently in Shanghai and met with a company called Export Now, which is in the Tmall and global Tmall e-commerce side. I was surprised that they represent the NFL, and so I'm curious if you know what the NFL Shield and that trademarks plans are, or how they're...
How do they represent? Actually, now I'm getting concerned. You're China. What business? They're in the export business?
They're in the export business, but they also protect intellectual property.
Oh, they protect okay, now I get it. Yes,
And so Ocean Spray is also looking to make sure that as we do business in China, we protect our intellectual property. So
you got it. I mean, that's the... We're constantly, I think we have a team of lawyers and people on the ground, and it sounds like it's Export Now, because for us, that's where all of the knockoff goods come from. And then because sites like, I don't want to pick on any e-commerce sites, so I won't mention them, but be very careful. If you go buy NFL licensed merchandise online, go to a team site or go to NFL Shop. Do not go anywhere else, because if you go to some of the bigger name brand merchandise sites where anybody's allowed to list anything, it's counterfeiters. And most of it emanates from China. I mean, no great surprise. And so we have a lot of lawyers and people on the ground fighting it. But I think until the Chinese government really decides, because when they want to crack down on something, they can do whatever they want because their people fear them. And so that's what I'd say. Be careful dealing with real intellectual property in China. Well, yes, sir.
Question from social media. Of all the various businesses you run, which is the most difficult to manage?
Oh, man. They're all fun. I mean, they're all fun. I guess, look, I think when you're the real challenge in our football business is bills. And since I don't, I guess on a piece of paper technically, but Bill runs the football side of the house. And I don't have to deal with that level of competition. And I think if you're in commodity, capital-intensive manufacturing, I think it's the hardest, but I love the challenge of it. And I think there's something about walking through a factory and seeing things made that gets you excited. So I would say our packaging business is probably the most challenging, but it's in a lot of ways a lot more rewarding, because running the business side of our sports businesses it's fun, but it's a lot of fun, but it doesn't have the same competitive challenges. You're only limited by your creativity there. Anything else? Cool. I thought I'd get a couple draft questions, but thank you all very much.